In this video, I'll show you how to assemble an Ocean Master Generation 2. We start by installing the flow plates and valve balls. The small screws that hold the flow plates in place get a drop of thread lock first. Next, we lift the shell into position. Here's a particularly handy tip. Place 3 washers between the shell and the pump housing. If they're around 5 mm thick, they'll raise the shell just enough to allow the gasket to be mounted from the inside. Once the gasket is in place, remove the washers again, and the shell and gasket will sit perfectly. Now, gently lower the rotor into place. Time to measure the thickness needed for the top gasket. First, we measure the distance between the top of the rotor and the sealing surface of the shell. I use a small custom rail for this. I take the total measurement and subtract the height of the rail, which gives us a net gap of 0.7 mm. The total clearance in the pump should be between 1 and 1.5 mm. So in this case, a 0.8 mm gasket fits perfectly. 0.7 plus 0.8 equals 1.5 mm. When we tighten the pump later, this gap will compress slightly as the gaskets are squeezed. With the top gasket in place, we crane the upper pump housing on top and install the stay bolts. It's important to tighten these bolts only lightly at first. They're just there to hold things together until the pump is placed on a flat surface. The feet may wobble a bit, so we loosen the stay bolts again and let the pump settle naturally before tightening them to spec. Next up, mechanical shaft seals. First, we push in the assembly bushings. Then we push in the back metal ring and lubricate the rotor shaft to ease the mounting of the mechanical shaft seal. Make sure the sealing surfaces of the shaft seals are degreased before installation, and avoid recontaminating them by using screwdrivers for the final push. As you do this push, you need to be very careful. Do not place the screwdrivers on the actual sealing surface, but only at the edge. After the rotating part has been pushed in place, we prepare and mount the retainer that holds the static part of the shaft seal. Again, we make sure that the sealing surface is degreased and mount the retainer flange by the 4 M12 bolts. We continue by repeating the process in the drive end. Once the seals are in place, we move on to the bearing housing, but first, we loosely mount the adjustment flange with bolts. It's important that these flanges are only loosely fitted at this stage. Off with the small assembly bushings, and on with the large ones for the bearing housings. Remember to keep the inspection hole facing downward when mounting the bearing housing, and be careful not to damage the radial shaft seals as the housing slides into place. We finish by tightening the housing to spec and repeat the process at the drive end. Now it's time to install the bearings. In this video, I'm using our own press tool, which is a bit more advanced than the one we sell to customers, but the principle is the same. Our tool just saves a bit of elbow grease. Once the bearings are in place, we install the shaft nut at the rear and tighten it to spec, followed by the front bearing cover. The rear bearing cover is mounted loosely and a dial gauge is placed on the shaft at the front. With the gauge in place, we double check that the two outer M12 bolts at the rear are loose, then tighten the inner ones. This pulls the rotor fully back to the non-drive end. With the rotor pulled back, we zero the gauge and make sure the rotor can't rotate. Now we do the opposite. Loosen the inner M12 bolts and tighten the outer ones. This moves the rotor fully forward to the drive end, and we can now read the total play on the dial gauge. In this case, it's 1.14 millimeters, which means we need to move the rotor 0.57 millimeters back to center it. So we go back, loosen the outer bolts, and tighten the inner ones until the dial gauge shows the rotor has moved 0.57 millimeters back. Things can be a bit tight, especially if lubrication was forgotten, so it may take some back and forth with the bolts and a bit of rotor rotation. But once the rotor is centered and stable, we lock it in place by first tightening the inner M12 bolts at the rear, then the outer ones. Finally, check that the rotor spins freely and doesn't touch the flow plates, and give the 4 M12 bolts at the front one last tightening. We wrap up the assembly by checking that all water pipes and plugs are properly installed. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions.